Welcome to Infinite Progress. This is Landon. Hey, let's get into this. Well, I want to welcome everybody and thank you for tuning in again. As this particular episode, we're going to talk about a meeting that took place earlier this year. I was about to say recent meeting, but it's been several months since then, at the Royal Society in England, where it kind of had a little bit of a ruckus, if you will, based on some of the position papers presented and some of the ideas defended at that particular meeting. Now, what we're going to do here today is sort of have a conversation that will springboard off of a discussion and a debate that was covered on the Unbelievable radio program. Now, that's a radio program over in England with Justin Brierley, and they typically get contrasting worldviews or even theological perspectives to debate particular topics. And that discussion sort of will be a catalyst for how we're going to address the topic. And the very question was, is neo-Darwinism dead? As a basic question. Now, some of you may be thinking, no, I'm looking at my biology textbooks. This thing is good as gold. Richard Dawkins has been going around for years saying it's as much of a fact as gravity, if you will, that there's nothing to see here, nothing to challenge. Others, however, in the scientific community over the years have been questioning this very hard. And it's for several different reasons. And we're going to be getting into some of those evidences here in the discussion today. And we have with us two of our usual cast of characters. And I will let them introduce themselves and describe their own worldview. We'll start with you, Ned. Go ahead and let our audience know who you are and just kind of describe your worldview in your own words, please.
All right. I'm Ned Purdom, probably better known as Negation of P, YouTube, whatever. I've been around probably about a decade doing this specifically. And I guess my background's education primarily. That's somewhat scientific, mostly mathematics and aviation related is what I do professionally. And I am, I guess, the other side of the fence from you guys. I'm agnostic at best. Most people would consider me atheist. I'm not a hard atheist. I'm not one of these guys that's going to come and I will make dogmatic claims about atheism. I don't like dogmatism in any form, but I definitely, tend to side with the scientific community, especially in this topic. So that's, I guess, unless you needed more, that's kind of where I'm at.
Awesome, thank you, buddy. All right, Trey. Let's just assume that we have some listeners that are tuning in for the first time. They haven't seen you on our program before. Go ahead and explain your worldview in your own words and explain a little bit about yourself. Hold on, Trey. You just muted your mic. Hit it again, bud. There we go.
Hey, all right, there we go. My name is Trey. I am a standard Southern Baptist. My background is predominantly in philosophy and biblical studies. I am what you would call a converted theistic evolutionist. I grew up a theistic evolutionist all the way, mostly through high school. And then I transitioned into, the intelligent design, creationist camps of several sorts. Not particular one, just into the overarching philosophies and theologies. But started off as an evolutionist at a young age, and I've since obviously changed my perspective on that very compellingly. And that's me.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. Now, a little bit of those intros that will help our audience out leads into kind of the first segment that we want to get into. And this sort of revolves around the general question of evolution. Now, when I'm saying evolution, that term is going to be a little more synonymous with Darwinism or the neo-Darwinian model, which in a sense is basically your descent with modification through random mutations over millions of years, sort of the tree of life model from single-celled organism to all the complex life we see today. So when I'm using the term evolution, that's what I'm speaking of. I'm not so much referring to you get a Chihuahua and a Great Dane because they evolved from a common ancestor that was of a dog kind, or we've seen one bacteria kind of evolve into a different type of bacteria, and we're going to label that a new species, but in general, it's still a bacteria. I'm not really referring to that when I use the term evolution. So I'm going to try to use those terms interchangeably with that little bit of caveat, if that satisfies you guys. But leading into our first question, I guess basically describe how your worldview accommodates or implements, even utilizes, and may even necessarily be dependent upon Darwinian evolution. And for the other side, describe how your worldview rejects evolution. So speak to the importance of evolution and how it fits in with your worldview. And Ned, we'll go ahead and start with you, buddy.
Okay. I don't mean to disappoint, but to be honest, it's about as important to me as gravity. And what I mean by that is that the existence of a God / gods, plural, is, in my opinion, an independent question. Any single theory in math or science really doesn't negate or confirm my worldview one way or another. There are many ways that I could see Darwinian evolution or neo-Darwin, and as you were saying, I'm not going to get all of that. I can see descent through modification as being used by God. And I know that there are some theists out there that actually believe that this is the case. Now, if it was proven wrong, would it be problematic? In the same way that I guess if we could find faster than light travel would be problematic. It's not so much that it's going to destroy it. It's just, again, it's the progression of ideas and scientific methodology and science to get closer and closer to the truth, whatever it is. So as much as I know that some guys or some people really depend on that as far as being a cornerstone to their belief system, I hate to put it this way, but it really isn't that much. Now, that being said, I do still believe that it's one of the best supported and well-vetted theories that we've ever come across. In fact, to be blunt about it, we understand evolution better than we understand gravity.
Let me press in real quick, Ned, and have you react to this. What would be your reaction to Richard Dawkins' famous line that Darwin made it possible for the first time to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist? Is that a little bit with what you're referring to there when you talk about we know more about evolution than we do gravity?
I don't know if I there's a lot of things about Dawkins that I don't like, in the same way that I know, there's stuff about all of the quote unquote horsemen that I don't agree with. And of course it gets me in trouble in quote unquote my circles. But I don't agree with that. I mean, to say that, that was the first time that we could look at the world without needing God seems to be a huge stretch. I mean, just look at Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. I mean, we can go back quite a ways and find people who were intellectuals, atheist intellectuals, arguably. If you look at Socrates, if nothing else, that not only could think rationally, but justify their rationalizations through other methodologies other than needing Darwinism. Now, does evolution help? Absolutely. It does make it easier. If if evolution is true, it would seem to point away from a God, at least to a certain degree. And that, again, I'm sure we can talk to many, let's say, deists who would say, well, my God set things in motion, ignited the spark of life, so to speak, and then walked away. And that would fit perfectly with what it would seem that the evolutionary theory matches what our historical record looks like. That's still a deistic beginning. That's still a supernatural force that started it. So that would take away, and instantly, if I did become convinced of that, that would instantly turn me from a atheist / agnostic to a believer. Now, it may not be the same belief that you guys have, but it would still, by definition, I wouldn't be an atheist anymore.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Ned. All right, Trey, we're going to punt this over to you. And how do you, as a good old Southern Baptist Christian who used to adhere to theistic evolution, obviously you're going to be able to share with some of the details that moved you away from accommodating evolution within a theistic framework as you once did, to now ultimately rejecting evolution as a worldview. Kind of explain how you as a believer, and I guess many that would share in your Christian worldview, approach this very topic of evolution. You, Trey, go ahead, bud.
Well, like I said, actually, I understand Ned's perspective there intrinsically. I have a couple books that are very specific on special versus specific gravity. And there is a lot that we completely misunderstand and misrepresent about gravity because of our perspective in the universe, because all of our experimentation is in a gravity-rich environment. The way gravity works inside of space itself, out where there's no planetary bodies, is intrinsically different. So when he's talking about understanding biology as a whole better than we understand gravity, I completely understand that. Additionally, as a former evolutionist, some of my favorite authors back then were like John Polkinghorne. John Polkinghorne was an advocate for evolution, brilliant physicist, held a chair at Oxford, very gifted, and completely Christian, theistic evolutionist. So, I never felt that there was any, disparity as an essential nature to it. I grew up like all of us. I went to school, and we go to school in America. It's not really optional. You learn evolution, and you do not learn alternatives. So we learn to test. What you're tested on is that material. So, I was, educated same as everybody else. But as with most education, it is somewhat indoctrination based. You learn specific ideas, specific concepts. And it was all fine and dandy. I actually, I had the privilege of, I was gifted at science. So as I progressed in school, I was actually allowed in high school to teach geology my junior year, because they did student teaching as part of as part of a program where you could get started teaching science even earlier and get some experience. Worked as class credit as well. So I was always very enthusiastic about the sciences. And so the theistic evolution perspective, I came from that. But somewhere along the way, some people raised some very simple questions. I was very defensive, obviously, of my theistic evolution at the time. And, I met a biological chemist. His name was Dr. Ridlin, very gifted researcher, continued on with his studies, brilliant man. And there are parts of what we understand in science that are empirical values, empiricism, stuff that's scientific method based, stuff that we've experimented on, replicated over and over again, stuff that we can hold to be true. And the irony is we all learned this in school as well. And the problem is there's a separation that exists. There's a theoretical separation that was exposed the difference between naturalistic philosophy that has put specific values on how we viewed the experiments and the experiments themselves. Ironically, it wasn't very challenging for somebody to point out some of the discrepancies because we all know the difficulties. If you've discussed it before with evolution, abiogenesis is the largest question with how abiogenesis, chemical evolution. You can start going to chemistry class, and all of a sudden you have a lot of questions about the nature of evolution. How do chemicals evolve? We watch biological organisms make adaptable changes, but we don't see gases and chemicals evolving into what they call smaller molecules, amino acids, glucose types, nucleotides. These are basic component necessities to move up into the change to what you call macromolecules, which are essential proteins, and carbohydrates, which are both necessary to get to life forms that could actually even get of evolution out significant jumps. And then Ned's a mathematician. He no doubt is more familiar with the math than anybody. The statistical unlikelihood of these coming together under any circumstances, even the Miller-Urey experiments, which were so evidentially compelling at one time, you point out the actual results of the experiments and it comes up short. There's no proof that life could come from this idea of a non-oxygenated environment. And as education goes on, you get more comprehensive understanding. But what I realized very simply was that I was being sold something as if it was a scientific empirical value along with my scientific empirical values. I was being taught chemistry and physics, and quite well. I did my homework. I'm very good at it. But the interesting part was I was being sold a story of an origin along with that, one that, unlike though like I said, there's a concept of uniformity with it and a philosophical uniformitarianism that is essential to it. The aspects of what I viewed were completely non-essential or contingent, and yet they were part of the education system too. It's when you're forced indoctrinated into something and you realize that that's occurring, you start to become very resilient in your distinctions. You really want to make a higher level discernment value. And so basically that's where I moved to was as I started discerning, I started researching adaptability principles and what are the arguments of creationism, intelligent design, why are these information principles essential, and why are some of these other ideas so relevant and timely, and what are the evidences for both sides. So that's kind of where I ended up, was say a quest for discerning empirical values, scientific data, versus concepts that were being included with that to compel me to a specific belief system.
So just for a point of clarity, if you can answer this part pretty quick, basically as a Christian, the Christian worldview is not antithetical to science as an endeavor of it examining the universe, biological systems, and so on. It's the, let's call it a meta-narrative, if nothing else, of neo-Darwinism as a sufficient explanatory model to describe how all the diverse living organisms came about in their present form. And particularly as a creationist, you're rejecting that evolutionary explanation. All the answers you gave there were sort of empirically, particularly at the origins level. But what about textually? Is there anything in the Bible that would compel one to reject the evolutionary explanation?
Yeah. So to give you an idea, there's just like Ned pointed out, there's a large amount of how we look at what's called the theological discipline of ontology, how we look at natural law and how God has expressed himself in his creation. There are old earth creationists, there are theistic evolutionists, and there are young earth creationists. So there is a significant distinction that can be viewed in Scripture, but it's all about what you prioritize as the best empirical value. Empiricism applies to science, it applies to history, and it applies to theology and philosophy.
Yeah.
So ironically, the reason some people like myself, for instance, who take a young Earth creationist is largely because we take a more literal, historical, grammatical interpretation of the first, say, 13 to 15 chapters of Genesis. And, if, like, say, the older Earth, they just take a more metaphorical view of those exact same chapters, or an apocalyptic literary style is what they apply to it usually. So, in that case, yes, I believe that there's some significant necessities in Scripture around the understanding of sin, or what they call harmatology and things of that nature. But there are that compel you away from neo-Darwinism. But Old Earth and Young Earth has a lot more versatility between the two.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you guys for answering that first line of questioning, and that's a good place to close down our first segment in discussing is Darwinism dead, particularly related to the Royal Society meeting that took place earlier this year. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. As always, feel free to leave comments and suggestions in the comment box below for some show ideas that you would like to see debated or discussed. As always, thank you everyone for tuning in and watching. Remember, infinity is endless and progress is necessary. Until next time.